today, Thursday the 6th of December. My name is Sylvia Michael and I'll be hosting today's meeting. I'd like to welcome all our presenters and attendees, and we'd ask you all to keep your microphones muted, except for me, but that was my mistake, and your webcams turned off during the webinar, unless of course you're presenting. If you do have a question, and that includes any technical problems, please type your question into the chat window and we'll try to resolve that as soon as we can. Also, if you're experiencing any technical issues, also put that in the chat window as well. Those of you who are presenting, thanks very much for your time. It's much appreciated. As each of you present, I will introduce you and ask you to unmute your microphone, and I will advance your slides as instructed by you. Everything today, including the webinar and the chat items, are being recorded and will be available on the website for your use as needed. There is also a survey link at the end of the presentation, which we would ask you to complete to help improve this webinar series. So let's start, and I hope everyone can now hear me correct. I hope if anyone can't, could you please put something in the chat window. So this is the agenda, and you would have all received a copy of the agenda in the invitation to the meeting. There's a slight change to the agenda. Stuart's at a workshop in Adelaide and is unable to deliver his presentation on the National Earth Observation Analytics Hub and SmartSat CRC. However, Stuart will be providing some notes which we will add to the website with the details of this webinar. So firstly, I'd just like to remind what the aims of this and the other whole of community webinars are about. The webinars are driven by the 10-year Australian Earth Observation Community Plan, which was completed in 2016. The plan delivers a unifying focus to motivate and guide the Australian Earth Observation community via communication, coordination and collaboration across government, industry, research and education. I'm getting some feedback from someone. Sorry about that. Okay, moving on. The plan recognises 5 priority areas of action: connection and coordination, securing Australia's role in the international Earth observation community, infrastructure and people, access to Earth observation data and services, and generating value, and is supported by a steering committee of 11 and 5 working groups. Each working group is responsible for the implementation of the 5 priority areas of action. At last meeting, Stuart mentioned that the steering committee's main focus has been on the business plan over the last few months, and this has continued. We have received a few final edits. We've also added some costings to that business plan, and we will be incorporating those edits and the costing values into the business plan over the next week or two. Our intention is that the business plan is not a static document and will be updated and revised as needed. The business plan will be used as a template for our discussions with potential financial support groups with whom we will be meeting in the new year. Until we have been able to source this funding, most of the activities of the working groups in addressing the 5 priority areas of action will be on hold. Within the business plan, we have defined the transition of the Earth observation as it stands as an informal entity dependent on volunteers and in-kind support to an incorporated association and registered Australian body. This new governance model has minimal setup costs, protects the committee office bearers from litigation, and allows Earth Observation Australia to apply for and to receive funding. As well as the business plan, members of the steering committee have contributed to the Earth Observation Forum, which is scheduled for September of 2020, the organisation of such, and Stuart will provide more details on this in the next presentation. There have been 2 submissions to the Queensland Government State Development, Natural Resources and Agricultural Industry Development Committee inquiry into the job creation opportunities in Queensland arising from the establishment of the Australian space industry. Stuart has also contributed to the above by speaking at a public hearing which was held on the 19th of October. And Stuart has also presented at the 18th Australian Space Research Conference. Title of his presentation was Linking Upstream and Downstream Using Australia's Earth Observation Capabilities, and that was on behalf of Earth Observation Australia. At this point, I'd like to hand over to Stuart for an update on the Earth Observation 2020 Forum. So, Stuart.
Cool. Thanks, Sylvia. I'm sitting in a foyer, so hopefully it's not too loud. If the audio isn't coming through clear, please let me know. Can I just get the slide advanced to the next one, please?
Sure.
Okay, sorry, I thought there was one in there that had the outline of the forum in there. All right, I'll just speak to the main points. So just very quickly, in September 2020, we'll be running a forum for Earth observation. This is addressing the first priority in the 10-year plan, which we've established, and the long-term call from these webinars over the last 3 years for a new national conference and forum to help discuss what we're doing in this area, connect better across industry, government and research, and improve collaboration. So the forum will focus on basically communication, coordination and collaboration. We've established a steering committee for this, which a number of people who are presenting today are actually on. It will be held at the Brisbane Convention and Entertainment Centre, who are helping us with the setup. And we're currently in the process of securing funds and key partner organisations to help underwrite this. So by March next year, we'll have more details on what this is actually going to look like in terms of a preliminary program and how it's going to be different to just standard conferences as well. So I'll leave that there, given we've got a full agenda. And if there are any brief questions, maybe type those into the chat window and I'll respond to them. And I'll just let Sylvia move on to the next item. Thanks, Sylvia.
Thanks, Stuart. Okay, so we're now going to have the current status and engagement presentations. And firstly, I'd like to invite Joe Andrews from the Australian Space Agency to provide his presentation. Joe, if you could just let me know, or unmute yourself and just let me know when you need me to move on to each slide. Thanks. You there, Joe?
Sylvia, can you hear me?
Yes, I can now, thanks.
Great, thanks Sylvia. I'm just taking this call from my phone, so I can't see my slides, but are we on the first slide, Sylvia?
You're on the first Australian Space Agency slide, yes.
Great. Oh, thanks for the opportunity to speak here. I guess some of you will be well aware of what the Space Agency is doing at the moment, but I'll just give you a quick overview. The Space Agency was established on 1 July this year as an outcome of the review of Australia's space industry capability that was carried out by Dr. Megan Clark, who is also now the head of the Australian Space Agency. The funding for the agency is $41 million over 4 years. $26 million of that is for the operating expenses of the agency, and $15 million is looking to engage with international agencies, and that funding commences in next financial year. I guess one thing that differentiates us from a lot of other agencies is our very strong industry focus. This is something that we saw was quite effective in the UK Space Agency, so we're trying to go one step more and be very focused on letting industry drive Australia's space activities. We see the agency as the front door for Australia's space activities. where we can talk to people domestically and internationally about the activity that they're seeking to undertake and hopefully connect them with partners that can carry that forward. One thing I like to emphasise is that we're not NASA. I think NASA has $10 or $20 billion of funding per year. We can't compete with that, so we're really embracing the Space 2.0 approach of small and agile and letting industry lead the way. Just looking at the slide in front of you, you can see on one side we have all our contact information, our inquiries email address, our space.gov.au website, where you'll find a lot of the information I'm talking about today, and our Twitter and LinkedIn feeds for people that follow those social media. On the other side, you see the areas where we're supporting the space sector, providing policy and strategic advice. A key element of this is we're putting together an investment plan that will hopefully be used to guide government in the future. We're trying to coordinate Australia's civil space sector. This is more like by talking to people and being informed and facilitating engagement rather than trying to command everyone to do what we say, which would be nice, but you can't always get that. Our focus is very much on growing the Australian space industry and the use of space. Some of you may be aware that we've been engaging with companies such as Airbus and Citadel through statements of a strategic intent, where we can get private organisations to clarify what they want to do in Australia, and we'll be progressing these with a number of other organisations as well. International civil space engagement is a key focus for us. My role is on international engagement in the agency. Some of you may have been at IAC earlier this year, where we had an Australian booth where we tried to showcase the different organisations in Australia. We're also engaging through other forums and signing MOUs with a number of international space agencies. These umbrella MOUs are aimed at facilitating further collaboration on specific activities. But I note we've got the legislation, international obligations part of our work. You'll note that the Space Activities Act is currently being revised, but we're also most recently did a release for comment on our charging model for regulation activities. This affects launches and satellites being launched by Australian entities. The final point I'd note is on inspiring Australia. We have been charged to inspire Australia through space. This has the focus on increasing STEM participation, but also just to sort of embrace the high-tech advanced manufacturing future. If I could just go on to the next slide.
Certainly.
Yep.
So it's there.
Yep, thanks. So this slide sets out our priority areas. I'll try and quickly go through these. Communication technology services and ground stations. We are a very popular choice for ground stations globally, so we're trying to exploit that. Space situational awareness for the sustainable space environment. Space services. This is a very broad one that looks at health, tourism, materials, technology, advanced manufacturing, just ways that we can service the space sector. PNT infrastructure and data. Topical to here is the Earth observation services, looking at leveraging our EO capabilities and developing applications that can be used in Australia and in export markets. Robotics and autonomous systems seek to leverage our capabilities in mining sector at the moment and our experience working in a very loosely populated country. The R&D and leapfrog technologies is really looking at niche areas where we think Australia can be competitive globally and looking at how we can progress in these areas. And the final point is on inspiring the Australian community, which I spoke about earlier. If I can go on to the next slide, thanks.
It's on, Joe.
Great. So this slide looks at our achievements over the last 150 days. We used to like saying that we're the newest space agency in the world, but Luxembourg has been announced in the last month or so, so they're even newer than us. The reach of the agency has been phenomenal. A metric used by our communications area is we've reached 25 million people in Australia. Some of them will be double clicks, of course, but that's a fantastic reach, and our department is actually having trouble trying to factor it in because we've never had this sort of engagement before. We've had the MOUs with France, the UK and Canada, and we're progressing a number of other agencies, the statements of strategic intent with Airbus and Citail. A lot of you would have been involved in our state and territory engagement that commenced after the agency was set up, and we had a great turnout to all that across Australia. Note the activity in the regulation space, the Space Activities Amendment that got assent on 31 August, and we've been doing quite a lot of launch licenses. I think you'll note that in the previous 10, 12 years, there was only 5 issued, and since 2016, we've had 15 issued, and that area is increasingly busy. And this is something we see both in Australia and globally. On the governance side, we've recently released our charter, which provides a strategic overview for the agency and maps out an advisory board. This advisory board is also part of a model that includes a space industry forum, a leaders forum, and a state and territory space coordination meeting. This joins our Australian Government Space Coordination Committee and the working groups that feed into that. So noting time, I think that gives a pretty good overview of the agency, but it might be best to leave the remaining time to any questions that people have regarding the space agency and its activities. Thanks, Sylvia.
Thanks, Joe. So if there are any questions for Joe, could you please type them into the chat window? And Joe, if you could respond then through the chat window.
I'm only on my phone here, so I can't see the chat window, unfortunately.
Of course not. No, that's right. Has anyone got any questions? If that they want to type into the chat window, and I'll put them through to Joe. Nothing that I can see, so thanks, Joe. We might just move on now. Thank you for your presentation. Great. Very much appreciate you taking the time to do that.
Thanks, Sylvia.
So we'll move on to our next presentation, which is an industry presentation by Karen Joyce about her company SheMap. So Karen, if you'd like to unmute and start your presentation, just let me know when you want me to move on to the next slide.
Cool, thanks Sylvia. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, thank you, Karen.
Excellent. Hello everyone, and thanks for having me here this morning. I'm just in the middle of teaching an intensive GIS class at the moment, so I can't stay for the full thing, unfortunately, but this is perfect timing at morning tea break to just pop in. I just wanted to give a bit of an update on what we do with SheMaps and where we're going. Some people may have heard previously about SheFlies, which was started under a state and federal government grants that I received with a couple of research partners. And once the funding finished, we decided to each go our separate ways with where we wanted to continue with working on engagement and activities within geospatial and drones. And because I have a particular interest on the geospatial side as opposed to the drone side, I started SheMaps instead. So the idea behind SheMaps is that we are building on trying to bring in more diversity into science, technology, engineering and maths. And so diversity being not just thinking about who does those things, so looking at race, colour, sex, religion, and particularly gender with our area of interest, but what STEM actually means. So there's still quite a lot of stereotype around the S in STEM for science really being chemistry, and just because chemistry is science doesn't mean to say that science is chemistry. So I really like to promote what it is that we do within the geospatial industry and teach particularly school children and their teachers that geospatial is super cool, and there's a lot of things that we can do with that to engage. So can I get the next slide, please, Sylvia?
Sure.
Thank you. So one of the things that I've been working on quite hard is really spreading the word. And so we now have a group through Duke University in North Carolina who running the SheMaps program and also starting up at the University of Maryland as well. And University of Tasmania has just recently come on board as well. So basically, I run through some training with them, and then they're able to use the programs that we do, which is all centered around a day in the life of a geospatial scientist. And they use that as part of their university outreach and engagement programs, be that for working with schools or open days, that sort of thing. Have the next slide, please, Sylvia. Also been working really hard on developing some online resources for, particularly for schools, but really for anyone who wants to work with them. So I have some lesson plans up there, and this is not just drone based. The first one is a litter bugs lesson, which is really coming off the back of my interest in the ABC War on Waste series and how we can look at mapping litter on university and school campuses, and potentially look at, you know, can we use GIS to decide, well, do we need more rubbish bins and where should those bins be, etc. So that's what that lesson plan looks at. There's a teacher's ebook that's designed for helping teachers bring drones into their schools, particularly with the idea of working with them for geospatial. And there's a little poster series as well that we have going there too. So that's sort of there to really help engage people. And I seem to have just lost. Can you still hear me, Sylvia?
Yes, I can, Karen.
Okay, cool. My screen just went blank. Yeah, so the idea is just spreading the word about all the cool stuff that we do. If you could just move on, Sylvia, there should just be a pop-up there that says Essential Teacher PD. So this is an online course that we run to help teachers bring drones into their classrooms. And the next one, so if you click again, Sylvia, for SheMaps Your Engagement, is the program that we run with universities to allow them to use all these activities to create some really cool engagement activities for their university outreach programs. And another click, please, Sylvia, our drone mapping essentials, which is really all about then again taking that next step to allow people to use drones for geospatial mapping and creating information products with GIS as well. If we could go to my last slide, please, Sylvia.
Yep.
So this is all about the future and what we've got coming up. And so at the moment, you'll see there a map of part of the Queensland coast with lots of dots on it. And those dots are all those schools in those particular regions within 100 Ks, maybe 50 Ks of the main roads there. And in March this year, we're doing a road trip down from Cairns through to around about Gympie and then back all the way back up to Cairns, and hoping to hit quite a number of those schools, sharing the love of geospatial there. And one more click, please, Sylvia. And so there should be 2 photos up there now. And next year, we're also rolling out a program that's called the Search for Queensland's Coolest Schools. And this is all about getting more schools using drones. So the idea of contemporary cool is using drones. And the other aspect of it is teaching teachers and their students how they can map the amount of green space and shade on their school campuses, and using GIS to suggest where are the areas where they might be interested in adding some more green space for thermal comfort and being extra cool as well. And so that's going to roll out to all schools across Queensland next year as well. So that's pretty much where we're at and where we're going over the next little while, and happy to take any questions if there are any.
Thanks very much, Karen. I have a question. So if we want to engage with your program, is there a suitable place on your website that we would?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you just see down the bottom of that slide, Sylvia, and thanks for bringing it up, it's got the website there, and you can contact us, which will just shoot us an email. But also we're pretty active on Facey and Twitter as well. So if you'd like to like and follow us, then yeah, please do so.
That's great. So are there any questions for Karen? Again, if you could type them into the chat window, it would probably be great. So we might move on. Thanks very much, Karen. Thanks very much for breaking your schedule to come and give us our presentation.
Thank you, and sorry I can't stay around, but enjoy the rest of the meeting.
Thanks.
Thanks.
So the next series of presentations are about Digital Earth Australia. We did have in the program an update from Geoscience Australia, but we don't have anyone who was able to present that.
Hello. Yes, you do. I'm here. It's
Oh,
Jono.
great. Thanks, John. I appreciate it.
No worries. Sorry, I thought I had got back to you, but obviously not. No, I'll cover that off on behalf of our guys today.
Fantastic.
Do you want me to get started?
Yep.
Look, I'm going to talk on two streams and leave the exciting one, the industry strategy stuff, to Alex. In terms of the development of the core technology that underlies DEA, which is the Open Data Cube, anyone can go and see where that's up to at any time. That's all in the relevant GitHub repository. I'm sure people on the call probably know how to get to that better than I do. Obviously, the functionality is growing all the time as we implement new things for the program, and that's something that people can take advantage of even if they're not using DEA itself. It's an open source product, so anyone's encouraged to join, contribute, take bits they like and use them. The license is quite permissive. The number of international users of the technology is growing, as are the number of contributors. People are taking it, applying it to their challenges and then contributing some of that back. So it's quite a dynamic community. And of course, it's not the answer to every question. There's heaps of really cool stuff out there, but the fact that it's open source, I think, is something that's getting interest from people. They know that they can see how it's working and so on. Some of these projects, they're emerging in places like Colombia, Mexico, Vietnam, Kenya, South Africa. And I guess we're glad that others are benefiting from that investment. And it also provides a platform for private sector cooperation, research projects, and capacity development projects between Australia and those countries. So that's something we're glad is a bit of a spin-off benefit as well. In terms of the other side I'm going to talk about, originally DEA was funded to deliver EO products that met Commonwealth government needs and Commonwealth government priorities, and that stream of work is ongoing, and it's guided by priorities set by agencies like the Department of the Environment and Energy, the Murray-Darling Basin Authority, and the Australian Bureau of Statistics. And some of the current priorities include mangrove extent, shallow water habitat, land cover, and so on. I think it's worth saying that the Earth Observation for Government Network, which includes the Commonwealth and state agencies, is absolutely key to that. We're trying to build national products, but it's absolutely critical that the expertise and knowledge of the states ties in with that as well. It's definitely something that needs a team effort. For anyone who's really keen, there's a 50-page program roadmap that explains all this in much more detail at ga.gov.au/DEA. It's got all the different projects and priorities in there that we're working on, and you might find something you'd like to benefit from, or maybe a project you'd like to collaborate on. And that program roadmap is regularly updated. It's kind of our way of telling people where the program's going, and that's kind of what I wanted to cover today. Thanks, Sylvia.
Okay, great. So you said the website was ga.gov.au/DEA. Is that correct?
Yep, /DEA.
Yep,
exactly.
Great. Thanks very much. So, Ian, are you able to present on the surface reflectance validation project?
Yes, I am, Sylvia. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you.
G'day, I'm Ian Lau from CSIRO in Perth, Western Australia for Mineral Resources CSIRO. We're working with the GA and other organisations down the bottom there on the DEA Surface Reflectance Validation Project, where we're looking at Landsat 8 and Sentinel-2 validation product of the surface reflectance product. It's coordinated by CSIRO project under DEA, run by GA. There's two phases of field acquisition, collecting data near or coincident to satellite overpasses since March 2008, and we're continuing on through to December to get a range of sun angles. The collection is using field spectrometers and panels, and sometimes some groups have sun photometers. and where QA of the instruments and the data and the equipment is being performed, and surface validation products are being validated against the surface reflectance we're collecting in the field. As part of the project, we're producing a protocols handbook for the process of collecting the data, as well as the processing and the final validation. And the data will be available as a national collection run out of Geoscience Australia, as part of Specchio and also on other data platforms. Next slide, please, Sylvia.
Certainly.
So at the moment, we have collected 36, approximately 36 collections around the country by the various groups. We have one site where we've collected a EOA, just a visible near-infrared sensor, and there are a couple of water targets that still need to be collected. A couple of the sites have SIMEL sun photometers permanently located at them as part of the Aerospan run network, and we're still collecting on, and there's a few more overpasses to be collected. So there's a couple of sites that will be going next week. Just on the left, there's an example of a Sentinel-2 overpass from April. This is data from Andrew Walsh from GA, and there's a small image of what the image looks like. And down in the bottom left corner, we've got a processing of the radiance data. So you've got those values at the top, running along the top of the panel measurements, and then along the bottom there, those ramping up measurements, radiance data collected along 6 transects in a south to north direction in the field, showing from the ASD spectrometer. This is showing one wavelength, showing the radiance increasing throughout the time. So once that's processed into reflectance, the plot there of comparison between a Pinnacle's site Sentinel-2B reflectance product from GA as compared to the surface reflectance from the ASD field spectrometer, once the panel calibration has been done on that. Next slide, please, Sylvia. In August, we ran a workshop with all the participants throughout the year who've been working on this, and to talk about our ideas and show an update on the results and future talking. And there should be a distribution of those slides and outcomes of that workshop soon. And the other part of the work of the handbook will be is in draft at the moment, and it's just being finalised, and it should be out by the end of by early next year. Thanks, Sylvia.
Great, thank you very much, Ian. So, Alex, are you able to speak about the industry consultation update?
Yep, absolutely. And hello, everybody. If we can go to the next slide. So, Frontier SI has been, on behalf of Digital Earth Australia, running some industry consultation, looking to engage with the private sector and how they work, how Digital Earth Australia is, or communicating outward, the way that Digital Earth Australia has shared their data and their systems and their software, what's available, and then listening to industry to identify what's needed and what could be done differently. Now, we've taken an agile approach, which doesn't mean that we don't know what we're doing, we're moving fast. It means that we're iterating as we go and making sure that we're able to be dynamic in this engagement. So we started off with consulting with industry leaders. We've just completed a consultation with the wider community, and we're soon to be delivering an industry strategy document, and then working on some labs projects, funding a variety of innovative uses of the Digital Earth Australia systems data services. Just seeing if we can encourage adoption and use, and sort of lowering the risk of commencing some of these projects. So if we can move to the next slide. as I mentioned, we've just completed running the workshops, and excuse the typo up the top there, engaged about 500 individuals in a series of webinars run across the country, including a technical webinar that delved deep into the software and services. We have also just completed industry workshops where we spent a full day with participants listening, engaging, talking about things, but also doing hands-on demonstrations with the Open Data Cube, leveraging Digital Earth Australia's data that they share out on Amazon's S3. So we think that that's been really valuable. We've got a great deal of feedback from there, and we've already heard from people who are using some of this material internal to their organisations to communicate what is available from DEA. And if you can move to the next slide. We're also continuing to work with DEA in building an interactive sandbox environment for the use of this data. So we've deployed an evaluation environment using the Open Data Cube, accessing the public data DEA publish. And what this means is that anybody can turn up without installing any software and start consuming data and doing data science on anywhere in Australia on these vast holdings of data. It actually accesses around 200 terabytes of DEA data, and although we're just getting started, we're getting some really good feedback on how this is useful, and there's a lot of work upcoming around that sort of sandbox space. In addition to the kind of foot in the door which this interactive data science environment provides, we've also got another bit of software called Cube in a Box, which is a environment that you can deploy to your own EC2 instance on AWS or onto your own desktop or laptop and start using the Open Data Cube and the data. And we're looking at providing a few more of these kind of infrastructure as code templates so that well, it's part of my focus around developer experience and making sure that the Open Data Cube is made less of a black box, and that the learning curve is made a little less steep, encouraging the adoption of the Open Data Cube and enabling the use of these vast quantities of data that Digital Earth Australia and USGS and Europe are publishing. So yeah, I think there's I think we've got one more slide briefly, but get in contact with us if you're interested in learning a bit more about the Open Data Cube and Digital Earth Australia data and the work that we're doing there. And yeah, that's all from me.
Great, thank you very much. I'd like to thank Jono, Ian and Alex for your presentations on DEA. Are very much appreciated. If there are any questions, again, could you please put them into the chat window, and otherwise we'll move on. So the next presentation is by Jono Ross about Australian International Earth Observation Collaboration. So Jono, are you right to go?
Yeah, thanks, Sylvia. I'm not sure if anyone from CSIRO is on the line, but they might talk about this. Sorry if it's a duplication, but look, they've been very active in terms of partnerships recently, as I hope people on the line are getting updates about. For example, Novasar, which CSIRO is a 10% shareholder, is now live. There's a very nice first image of Sydney Harbour that's out there as well, and that's a major step up for Australia's participation in the international Earth observation community, actually having kind of 10% ownership of that mission as a national facility. And I believe there's a range of workshops and engagements happening around the country to make sure that it is operated as a national facility. CSIRO has also announced CSIRO Sat-1, a small Earth observation satellite to be launched in a few years. So it's an exciting time. I think all this stuff gives us a whole new avenue of international engagement to add to the engagement we have already on the application side and the CalVal side and so on. So more broadly on the data supply side, one thing we're always looking at a national level is the risk of our public good data supply. An example, a few years back, it was looking pretty bad in terms of Landsat class data with the failure of Landsat 5 and lack of clarity around the Sentinel-2 missions. But it's things are looking a bit better now, but it's not something we want to take for granted as our dependency on this data increases. So right now we're exploring options to reduce our exposure to changes in data policy by suppliers of what you might call baseload public good data, such as the United States and the European Union. And the approach we're looking at is to find opportunities where Australia can add value to the global Earth observing system by filling gaps or contributing to partnerships, rather than an approach based on constellations or single sovereignty satellites for the sake of it. Our view is our products and services will be much better if we're able to take advantage of everything that's out there. So both the US and Europe are currently engaged in detailed architecture studies relevant to this. On the US side, there's a NASA USGS study into what the missions beyond Landsat 9 will look like. And I think some Australians might have contributed to a request for information that NASA and USGS had out in November. And on the European side, they're looking at what the existing Sentinel missions might look like in an evolution. And they're also looking at new missions such as hyperspectral, thermal, and so on. And what we're doing is working to feed in both Australian desires for what those missions might do, but also Australian capabilities. Our view is there may be opportunities for Australia to be more active contributors to those programs in the future. And engaging in this early technical work is obviously key to lining up those opportunities. And of course, the Australian Space Agency, having them there now, really gives us credibility in having these discussions. It's clear to our partners that the agency is there and that they're able to help connect them with all the very clever and innovative technology providers that we have. I also like to touch on Copernicus Australasia, which is used to be called, I think, the Copernicus Data Hub. That's a collaboration between Queensland, New South Wales, WA, CSIRO, GA, and New Zealand. And it provides access to a well-maintained set of Sentinel data for Australia, Southeast Asia, and the South Pacific. It's available at copernicus.gov.au. And usage is increasing, but we're keen to get the knowledge out there. It seems pretty stable now. Early on, it was we were dealing with some technical issues with Europe, but now we think the data supply is very smooth. And we're also in discussions with some of our international partners about how maybe that's expanded to include non-Copernicus data and become a more general Asia-Oceania satellite Earth observation data hub. So that's something that we're working on. In the CEOS world, Committee on Earth Observation Satellites world, Australia is starting to prepare for its strategic implementation team chair period in 2020 to 2021. This comes off the back of our chair period. So what that means is that there'll be two more detailed, more technical CEOS meetings that will be held in Australia in those years. The first one in Hobart in April 2020 and the other one in April 2021 in a location yet to be determined. CEOS is a great forum through which Australia can give back to our partners, but it also provides opportunities to influence their programs. And an example of this is the CEOS Analysis Ready Data for Land effort. We're seeing agencies now either starting to generate or publishing plans to provide analysis-ready data, which obviously makes all our lives easier. It's not mandatory to use these high-level products, but the fact that they're going to be there certainly makes it easier if you can trust them. But it is important that Australia provides feedback on the quality of the data they're producing and its suitability to Australian conditions, so that they take that into account in their development activity. And certainly that's something I know a number of Australian agencies and institutions are doing. Final point, Australia will host the 2019 Ministerial Summit of the Group on Earth Observations, or GEO, next year. That summit, we're looking at cabinet level ministers from 100 plus countries, space and spatial industry leaders, heads of international organizations. The summits only happen about once every 4 or 5 years, so it's a big milestone. So our goal at the Australian government level will be finding opportunities for the Australian EO community to participate in and benefit from that event. One particular angle is GA, CSIRO, and the Space Agency will be ensuring there's a strong industry track to get other countries to encourage their private sector to attend so that they can engage with the Australian Earth observation industry. We also think the summit is a big opportunity for some of these international players to meet with the Australian Space Agency and for the Space Agency then to facilitate discussions with local companies. I did just see, just before I shut up, a question from Michael Hewson. So ESA have announced they will be starting global production of Level 2A products now. They have been less clear on exactly when that process will be concluded, but it's something that they're starting to push the buttons, so to speak. Thanks, Sylvia. I'm happy to take any questions as well.
Thanks very much, Jono. There's also Carsten's made a comment on the chat window about CMR's use and applications of Copernicus, and there's a website there too. So if there are any other questions for Jono, could you please put them into the chat window, and we'll move on. Thanks again, Jono. So the next presentation, hopefully, is about CSIRO Earth observation activities. And Edward King, are you able to make a comment on that at all?
Sylvia, it's Glenn Newnham here. I can speak on behalf of Alex if Edward doesn't want to.
Thanks very much. Please do so.
I just have a few points that Alex briefed me on. So just in terms of internal arrangements, our Centre for Earth Observation that Alex is leading within the Astronomy and Space Science Business Unit, that's just received a tick for ongoing funding. So that's good in terms of the maintaining a sort of central point of engagement in terms of space activities and Earth observation. And so that group will lead our engagement with the Australian Space Agency, support some of our internal EO and space activities, support international engagement, etc. So that's just nice in terms of sort of continuity and Alex remaining a strong point of contact with CSIRO for the people on this call. In terms of Novasar, John already mentioned Novasar. The status on that is that John mentioned that there's already some imagery available. We're working on essentially the systems by which image requests would be taken. So there's a request for a quote on a ground station provider, and we're just developing essentially the system for people requesting imagery, and the imagery would be provided free. So as Jono said, it's a national facility, so the imagery would be provided free to research organisations, I believe, and there would just be some sort of review process around the request for imagery. The CubeSat project, there is a preliminary design for the payload of that around, and the sensor is a hyperspectral sensor between 950 and 1650 nanometers, so it's a shortwave infrared hyperspectral, 120 meter ground resolution, and Stephen Gensimer is leading the development of that payload. Just one other matter, internally we've had a call for proposals for what's called the Space Future Science Platform. So it's a call for projects which are sort of underpinning space science projects, and that includes Earth observation projects. So they're the kind of things that it's targeting really science that's difficult to fund through industry collaborations, government collaborations, so really sort of fundamental science projects. And I mention it in this forum because I think people who are interested and feel like they have an idea for a sort of fundamental EO science project should probably be engaging with Alex or with another CSIRO science contact, and maybe looking to develop up a project, and project proposals for that are due in January 18. So that's all I had, Sylvia.
Thanks very much, Glenn. So the agenda says National Collaborative Research Infrastructure and Earth Observation. Jono, are you able to speak on that?
Yep, happy to talk on that one.
Thank you.
Not a lot of news specifically. I think there's a lot of work going on now to, I guess, implement the announcements that were made earlier this year around ongoing funding for existing facilities and some of the new priorities. One that I think it is of interest to this community is the scoping study that's kicking off for an environmental prediction system. This was one of the recommendations in the new NCRIS roadmap. The system itself hasn't been funded, but what has been funded at this stage is the scoping study, and that's starting to ramp up. I think it's fairly obvious that such a prediction system would have a very heavy dependence on Earth observations. I certainly know there's a few people from the community involved in the governance of that, including Dr. Adam Lewis from Geoscience Australia. So I think that will be a very important study for what kind of EO-related infrastructure NCRIS might fund in its next rounds. Just one other update that's kind of related. A key aspect of the proposed EO facility that was submitted for NCRIS but ultimately wasn't put into this round was CalVal. So what CSIRO and GA are doing is funding a process to design a national CalVal network. Name maybe to change, but that's kind of the idea. I guess what we're looking to do is create a structure that enables relevant bodies like GA, CSIRO, state governments, TURN, the Space Agency, and so on, to co-invest into strategically critical CalVal facilities and programs. The network would be cooperatively governed and funded, with relevant participants agreeing to manage those facilities against an agreed set of standards. So there'd be some mutual obligation in that. And the idea is the network as a whole would become a globally relevant and valued integrated facility. So whereas now we've kind of got often particular agencies ending up running a facility off internal budgets, answering to internal stakeholders, but then obviously wanting that to be something that supports the broader community. The idea of this is to set up a framework that helps with that. What we'd be wanting to do, of course, is make Australia also a go-to place for people looking to test missions or sensors, to develop applications, or to undertake research by giving them a comprehensive, well-maintained, expert-supported test bed for Earth observation, sensors and applications. The sustainability is a big piece, so that broader ownership of the network would be key, and also it would help with transitioning facilities from research infrastructure funding to operational funding. For example, as the measurements that those facilities are supporting start to make their way into operational programs, then that funding should transfer. And then also, of course, creating space to bring on new facilities that support emerging research priorities. So the idea would be that framework would be consistent with what was proposed more generally in the Earth observation NCRIS facility proposal, so that if that does ultimately get up, then the network would be ready to plug into it. So watch this space. There'll be stuff coming out around that over the next little while, but it's something we think will be valuable not just to companies and researchers in Australia and governments in Australia, but also internationally. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Jono. Our next presentation is SSSI Remote Sensing and Photogrammetry Commission by Peter Kinney. Peter's got a separate slideshow, so just forgive me if just let me start this for you, Peter. So can everyone see that RSP Commission screen? Yes? Oh, excellent.
Yep, sorry. Just unmuting, yeah.
Thanks. So please, Peter, if you'd like to start.
Oh yeah, the goal wasn't really knowing what to expect here, so I asked to give you a quick overview of the Remote Sensing and Photogrammetry Commission of SSSI, 3 to 5 minutes, and I'll see if I can get it done in a minute because everybody else has gone pretty long. Anyway, so next slide please. I hope everybody knows what the survey SSSI stands for. We have a bit of a different structure within the SSSI insofar as if you think about surveying, there's so many surveyors that you tend to have regional groups and a whole bunch of people working together at a local level. The photogrammetry, Remote Sensing and Photogrammetry Commission, we actually spend most of our time working at a national level. Our chair is Petra Holmotz, based out of Curtin University. I hope you guys know her. And we've got a list of various national members from the different states. And we have, within those states, we have people who are the elected chair to be on both the state and the national commission meetings. I guess one of our focuses for 2019 is working out how we do professional development better. I think under Petra's, I've only been on the commission for, I guess, 6 to 8 months myself. So I'll do more of a looking forward presentation rather than looking back. But we're looking at how we do better professional development within the industry. We're also looking at how we certify people and get certification working. The remote sensing industry is one of those parts of the spatial industry where it's unusual not to have a PhD when you start talking to the people involved. So it is highly educated, a bunch of professionals, and how do we go and get those that recognised in a certification scheme? Okay, we also have a role in advocacy, and we're working on how we define that and the migration of skills across different regions of the world to get them recognised. If you wouldn't mind taking us to the next slide. Okay, so our activities, we're obviously going to be supporting a remote sensing and photogrammetry commission group meet up in Adelaide in September next year. There'll be Digital Globe user groups in at least Melbourne next year, associated with the Locate conference. And we're looking at doing remote sensing webinars through the year to help promote the profession and keep the profession up to date, I guess. We're looking at the conference in 2019, the surveying conference up in Darwin, and supporting that, and looking at scholarships and offering scholarships and for presenting students, and offering to run a number of sessions because the surveyors are actually crossing over into remote sensing more and more with drones and different sensors they're using. And we're setting ourselves up. It feels like sometimes we're setting ourselves up from scratch. We have memberships of the Earth Observation Australia, obviously, and also the Space Industry Association of Australia and IEEE and different organisations around the world. Okay, next slide. Might be my last slide. One of the things that we are planning on doing is supporting the Earth Observation Australia conference in 2020. We're already seeking internal resources from the SSSI to support that, and of course active participation and before and during the conference. That's it. I hope that's what you wanted.
Thanks very much, Peter. Appreciate it. So I just move on here. So if I could now call on Deanna Hutchison to give us a presentation on CEBA. You there, Deanna? Doesn't look like Diana's on the present. Is that correct? In that case, we'll move on. My apologies for that. And as I mentioned before, Stuart's unavailable to give his presentation on the National Earth Observation Analytics Hub, so we'll just move on as well from that. So if there's any general business that anyone would like to raise at this point, if you could unmute yourself and mention, or just put something in the chat window. Great, I'll just move on then. Thanks. So I'd like to thank all our presenters and attendees. This is the last meeting for this year, obviously, but our next meeting will probably be in early February. Before I say goodbye, I'd like to remind everyone, if you are able to complete the survey, and that the meeting recording will be uploaded onto the EOA website probably next week. I apologise for the delay starting, my errors with the unmuting myself, and I'd also like to thank you for your patience, this being my first go at hosting the webinar series. Thanks again to all our attendees and presenters, and I'll now close the meeting. Bye everyone.
Thanks, Sylvia. Bye.